Responding to stress. Responding and being able to cope with stress is what most people today are looking for, and thus it would be worth exploring how to respond to stress in the quest to gain some control over this negative effect and get back some semblance of peace in the everyday life cycle of the individual. The body naturally reacts to any indication of stress, and most times this response is not healthy and often fatal. When the body is challenged by any condition that it considers being under stress, it will kick in the natural responses that would require it to sort out the problem as quickly as possible in order to normalize the overall conditions. The hormones and cortisol from the adrenal cortex and adrenaline form the adrenal medulla go out on if usual synchronicity patterns. The basics. In the quest to normalize the body, many of the various systems will pit itself against each other. This most often will cause even further damage both mentally and physically. The initial ways the body responds to the mounting stress levels is through very visible conditions, one of which is skin inflammation or irritation. Cortisol also contains immune system responses, and is particularly useful when the responses are harmful, as then the symptoms can be treated as opposed to being a silent problem. Among the more visible signs are usually allergies and autoimmune disorder. The responses are described as allostasis, which is the stability of the body being maintained, or the homeostasis through the various stages of change. The body actively copes with the challenge by expending energy and attempting to put right the situation. For the most part as usually succeeds, but if left unchecked the stress situation can eventually prove to be too much for the body to handle. Where does stress come from? It is perhaps an accepted fact that stress is usually brought on by outside forces. This is so ingrained in most people's mindsets, that the slightest inconvenience or signs of being pushed out of the comfort zones will get some negative reactions from the body, and that would be considered stress. Generally outside forces are blamed for the internal turmoil that stress is supposed to cause. Where is it? When life in general does not unfold the way we perceive it should, determines the stress levels we experience. The element that needs to be controlled is becoming too attached to the acceptance that this disturbs the usual pattern in the daily life cycle, and that any changes in the current cycle are not so easily accommodated. Therefore, conditioning the mind to cope and overcome the circumstances that are perceived to contribute to the stress will then allow the individual to better help both body and mind to avoid any unnecessary conditions. Stressful thinking leads to stressful feeling is the most simplistic way of putting the condition into some perspective. Most studies tend to show this conclusively, and it does seem to be true that on some unconscious level, the extent of the stress felt is connected to the circumstances experienced. We can actually cause stress to be a condition within the body as our worries, fears and anxiety level are elevated by mental perceptions. Negativity and the mind is closely connected to the onset of stress, and most individuals somehow have the ability to convince the mind of things that have actually not unfolded. Not will it be possible to be so, but with this conditioning the mind and body will work almost hand in hand to bring out the stress levels from within. Therefore, getting into the habit of negative thinking will spark this response, and the more it progresses to be a common reaction, the lesser the chances are to enable the body to cope with the onslaught. Your first step in managing stress. Managing stress adequately would require the need to first be able to identify the main causes of the presence of stress within the confines of the individual's life. When this has been identified, then the relevant steps can be taken to address the stress-inducing circumstances. First step. Some of the more common signs of stress are nervousness, withdrawal, constant tiredness, frequent headaches, increased use of alcohol, smoking and other unhealthy habits, an unexpected loss or increase in the diet intake or body weight, restless sleep and irrational emotional outbursts and behavior patterns. There are all indications of an individual suffering from high level of stress. In recent times, the stress levels of most people have been so alarming, that more often than not, hospitalization has to be recommended, where complete rest and medication is prescribed to normalize the body systems. Research has also been able to show that life expectancies have reduced drastically due to the presence of stress. Therefore, the idea behind managing the stress is all about gaining control over the stress, which should be to identify and address the possible causes of the stress, and then work towards ways to overcome it effectively. Once the symptoms can be identified and linked to stress condition, then the proper approach can be matched to the symptoms to improve the situation. This would require the individual to have a clear plan drawn up which would be based of combating the stress occurrences with very practical and proven methods. These methods may include the use of a proper diet, exercise, or the actual physical change of environment. Being able to focus on a holistic view of the situation that causes the stress rather than one particular action that triggers it, will help the individual better understand and seek ways to avoid or improve on the circumstances that spark the onset of stress. Easing your tension to reduce stress. It is popularly believed that if an individual is not exposed to the stress-causing circumstances, then the occurrence of the stress will be very unlikely and therefore not a dominant factor to contend with on a daily basis. This has some truth to it, but it is not always possible to avoid or remove oneself from a circumstance that will eventually cause the stress to surface. One of the ways that is recommended by most experts on the subject of stress management is to ease the tension and in doing so bring the stress levels under adequate control. The following are some tips on how to ease tension and reduce stress levels significantly. Ease up. Rest. This is considered a very important ingredient to have in the makeup of an individual's lifestyle. A lot of rest will give the body and its various systems time and the leeway to rejuvenate adequately. This should be enough to keep it functioning at its optimum, thus providing the ideal circumstances to meet any possible additional requirement on its system both mentally and physically. Relaxation. The individual should explore various ways to relax both the body and the mind. These ways should be easy and applicable to the situation at the time. Some relaxation methods can be done longer and in more calming surroundings, while some would require the individual to tap into the inner self to bring forth the calming mindset to cope with any particularly stressful situation as it occurs. Pacing oneself. This is also another method of ensuring the tensions are eased or even preventing it from surfacing altogether, if the individual is able to pace the workload to keep it from becoming too overwhelming. Almost all cases of stress will be eventually connected to the fact that the circumstances that induced the stress were overwhelming, and the natural mechanisms that kick in would be the occurrence of stress. You need a quiet mind to think clearly. There are some people who turn to the practice of quieting the mind through various different methods, of which meditations come out as the most popular. This method is usually practiced for the specific purpose of helping the mind to distress and take on a more serene and quiet thought process. Meditation is often recommended for those who are hyper in the way they approach any task or project, and then get stressed when the various aspects of the endeavor does not play out as desired. This will put the individual in the panic mode, which almost always is a big stress-inducing feature. Meditation can be practiced in many different ways, and through the various ways the practice of the quieting of the mind would be the most dominant one. Get quiet. In this particular form, the quieting of the mind would require the thinking part of the mind to be brought under control and be quieted, using the techniques which would be taught and required to be mastered. The idea would be to block the mind from focusing on the issues that are causing the stress and the ways to solve these issues, and instead redirect the mind to focus on other more calming elements. These may include elements such as a serene scene in the mind's eye, a calming feeling, a phrase, or anything that will cause the redirection of the thought process to be pleasant and calming. The inner voice should be tuned to helping the body adjust to better thought processes and induced into letting go of the problem completely. The calmed mind will then be able to feel the positive energy this kind of practice generates to refuel and rejuvenate the whole system and situation. Although quieting the mind may prove to be very challenging indeed, with a lot of focused practice it is possible to achieve some level of control. Managing stress at work. Stress is usually brought on by anxiety, and when this particular condition is addressed, it is possible to avoid building up the stress levels within the daily functions of the individual. Addressing the underlying causes of the stress would better help the individual deal or change the circumstances that cause the stress, and thereby learning to comfortably adapt and cope with workplace situations. At work. Giving up coffee. Most people are really unaware of the effect coffee has on the body and mind systems. Coffee helps to further elevate any conditions into hyperactivity, thus creating the ideal combination that further enhances any stressful circumstances. The coffee flows into the blood and causes the adrenaline to be overly stimulated, thus putting the brain into overdrive. Being better organized. This is also another popular advice given to most stress-filled individuals. The idea of being organized does not seem to have any clear positive contributions to the individual, thus the inability to incorporate this very beneficial trait into the daily schedule. Learning the benefits of being organized will help the stressed-out individual to better appreciate its positive contributing factors, and when this is well adapted as a daily practice, the quality of life would definitely be much better. Taking short breaks to stretch and relax the mind periodically will also help to keep stress under control. Whenever the individual feels a little pressured, taking a few minutes to unwind and refocus after being energized will be helpful. Getting some fresh air will also work wonders on the body and mind. Stopping for lunch and tea breaks is also very important to keep the mind off work for a little while. Enjoying the break while the body goes through the replenishing of nutrients to the body is a good idea. At home, being organized is probably the best way to beat the stress condition from being a regular occurrence. When there is some form of organization evident, all the individual elements that contribute to a smoother flow in the day would be covered, thus unfolding a completely new and calmer way of getting through the day. Thank you for watching.